I found a farm at a very, very reasonable rate and bought it right away and called my wife and said, honey, I just bought a farm in Wisconsin. And she says, well, I hope you have fun living there alone. After a little persuasion, and after she saw it, she became enthusiastic and we moved the family to Wisconsin. I had no intentions of building a studio or anything of that nature. I was doing a lot of corporate image films, documentaries for a producer friend of mine in Chicago. Did a lot of traveling, did very well financially, and with that I started doing more and more post-production work in Wisconsin and editing, got heavily into editing and cinematography. And very slowly I started building a post-production facility first, which changed when I decided to make a little experimental feature film called Invasion from Inner Earth, originally called The Selected. And from that point on, we started building more and more buildings and more equipment and to be self-sufficient in the boondocks of Wisconsin. So I was quite busy and being paid well for that work until a friend of mine in Madison, Wisconsin, Richard Huff, called me and says he had the itch of making a feature film, but he didn't know how, so we started getting together and we knocked heads on finding a suitable science fiction picture, never even thinking about giant spiders. Ultimately, finally came up with the idea of tarantulas. And it was only going to be tarantulas until I took the script, the first draft, to California and met with Brandon Chase. And Brandon Chase immediately says, well, how big can you make these spiders? I said, I don't know. I said, I suppose we can somehow gimmick it up and make it a 10-inch or 12-inch spider sometimes. He says, well, I like the script, I like the idea. He says, but the spider's got to be bigger. Well, long story short, it ended up, can you make a 25-foot spider? I have no clue. In the meantime, because he took a liking to the project, I went back to Wisconsin and started telling the potential investors, I said, we got to have a lot of money to do this because it requires special effects. But by the time the first money came in or was committed, we still didn't know how to make a big spider like that, except maybe animation, which was out. He didn't want that. It had to be real. And it was by sheer accident that my good friend Bob Millay, a self-made special effects guy from Chicago, he says, what happens if you take a Volkswagen and convert that to a big spider and make it mechanical? I said, you think you really could do that? He says, oh shit, yeah. My daughter was the gal that furred the spider. We ordered fun fur. That was the cheapest, the easiest to get. And she got all her girlfriends in the area from the high school. And first it was covered with chicken wire. And then over the chicken wire, put the fun fur, and they had to sew all the fun fur onto this chicken wire. But the spider was never ready until the last 4 days of shooting. And then when I finally saw it, my friend Bob had taken 2 plastic garden globes and put them on 2 eyes on each side. I said, Bob, this is not going to do it. Spiders don't look like that. They don't have 2 bug eyes like that. So in the long shot, very long shot, it worked real nice. And the thing we didn't anticipate that it would take, and even today there's uncertainty, it's 7 or 9 kids that got into the spider and had to work the legs with both hands on big springs. At that year, we had about 99 or 100 degrees heat. So we had 7 kids in the spider 100 degrees. It was piping hot. I'm surprised we didn't have any, knock on wood, any accidents or anything go wrong. These kids, I think, lost a couple of pounds each. I had Steve Brody committed almost immediately, and he knew the script. He knew the story and everything. We met several times in Los Angeles. He called Bud Hale, and we had lunch, talked about it. Alan Hale signed up. And from there on, it was Barbara Hale, and Kevin Brody was a friend of Tane Botkins, who in turn was a friend of Bob Easton's. So it all came together, and we just made a personal deal for everybody. And it was very, very easily done, no agents involved. We just sat down over lunch and kicked the whole thing around. Everybody was happy to get out of Hollywood and come to Wisconsin and do a fun picture. But then came the problem of the scripting. Bob Easton was engaged as a writer by Brandon Chase to make sure the script is better than it was. And Richard Huff was still the original writer of the script in Madison. And these guys could not get along. Bob Easton, when he first got the script, he came to me and said, Bill, he says, this will be a disaster if it's shot the way it is. If we don't insert some campy humor into it and not take the whole thing serious. I said, I think that's phenomenal, a phenomenal idea. Let's do it. And when we told Richard Huff about it, he said, oh my God, no, you can't do that. And he immediately started fighting with Bob Easton. So Bob Easton was writing on location where we were, and Richard Huff was down in Madison, 5 hours away, writing his bit. We got the pages and tried to put them together. It clashed totally. It wasn't anything like Easton and I saw it. I basically said to myself, I just got to think in my head of how I'm going to finish this and where I'm going to in the ending, and develop as is. And Bob Easton and I talked over the camp stuff, the campy stuff, every day, and looked at what we were going to do. Without his help, I think I would have been in deep shit trouble. The tarantulas? Oh, we purchased those in California, I'm proud of them. I think we started out with 5 or 6, and each one had a name, and they were living in my house, and everybody was just panicky. Bob Millay, the guy that came up with the VW idea, he loved those things. He gave them all a name, and he petted Tanya, the orange and black one, and had it crawl on his arms and shoulders and everything, and everybody was frightened as all hell of him except Bob. He was the spider handler, and when Tanya died, when Barbara Hale closed the briefcase on top of a car too fast, Bob was grieving. He was crying for hours. Brandon Chase insisted that I take the picture the moment it shot out to Los Angeles for editing. And I had to go out there. Matter of fact, I took the whole family. We went out to L.A. and started cutting. Every time I left for any time period, he would do behind cutting. I opened in Dallas and New Orleans, and multiple openings at the same time with big campaigns. And then finally I watched the Johnny Carson show, and Johnny Carson comes on and he says, would you believe? He says, $300,000 low-budget movie makes $24 million gross. And then he read a little about the story of the spider. And that's when I was first informed about the grosses. I think the most proudest thing I can think of is the fact that I built a enigmatic business and industry in the state of Wisconsin as the one and only feature film studio in the state, or in the Midwest actually, and it was successful for over 3 decades. And hopefully somebody remembers it and preserves that memory and concept.